What if the story of Jesus you've known your whole life was edited, not to protect your soul, but to control your mind? What if ancient Gospels once spoke of a deeper truth, a truth where salvation isn't earned through fear or ritual, but remembered within? These Gospels were banned, buried beneath centuries of silence, but they were never lost. Before we uncover what was hidden, take a moment. If your soul longs for the truths they tried to erase, if you feel something sacred stirring within, subscribe to this channel. Not for us, but for the journey that begins with remembrance. This is Mystica Nexus, and what follows may forever change what you believe. Are you ready? Let's begin. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why there are only 4 Gospels in the Bible? 4 books carefully chosen, canonized, repeated in every sermon, every Sunday school lesson. But why those 4? What if I told you there were once dozens? In the earliest centuries after Jesus walked this earth, his followers didn't rely on one single book. They passed down stories, teachings, visions, many of them written, and many of them forgotten, or more accurately removed. There were Gospels of Peter, of Philip, even of Thomas. Each one carried a different voice, a different flavor of truth. Some emphasized wisdom, others the divine feminine. Some challenged the idea of sin, punishment, and even the resurrection. These texts weren't chaotic ramblings. They were cherished, read by early Christian communities across Egypt, Syria, and the Holy Land. But then came a turning point. In the 4th century, Christianity became more than just a movement. It became an institution, and institutions need order, structure. In 325 AD, Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea. It wasn't just a theological gathering, it was a political decision. What books belong in the Bible? What gets declared heresy? Which voices get to shape the future of Christianity? And so, many Gospels were cast aside, not because they were false, but because they were dangerous. Dangerous to what? You see, the Gospels that were kept, they reinforced a certain narrative, a hierarchy, one Savior, one church. But the Gospels that were banned, they spoke of something radically different, that the kingdom of heaven is within you. That divine truth isn't locked behind rituals, but waits in silence inside your soul. That Jesus came not to be worshipped from afar, but to mirror who you truly are. Pause with me here. What would have happened if these Gospels had survived? Would we have feared hell or embraced our own light? Would we still bow to gatekeepers or walk freely into the sacred space within? If you've ever felt that something essential was missing from the teachings you were raised with, you are not alone. Say it in the comments. I'm ready to remember. Because this is only the beginning. In the next chapter, we enter the desert to a cave sealed by time, where one of the most powerful texts ever written waited nearly 2,000 years to be heard again. The desert keeps secrets. For thousands of years, the sands of Egypt have swallowed temples, tombs, and treasures. But perhaps the most precious thing ever buried was a book, or rather, a collection of books. A library sealed inside clay jars, hidden in a cave near a place called Nag Hammadi. The year was 1945. A group of farmers digging for fertilizer stumbled upon a sealed jar. Inside, a miracle. 13 leather-bound codices, ancient texts written in Coptic. They didn't know it yet, but they had unearthed something that would shake the foundation of Christianity. Among these texts was the Gospel of Thomas. Now, pause here. This was not a gospel you'd hear in Sunday sermons. It had no stories of Jesus walking on water, no virgin birth, no crucifixion, no resurrection, just 11-14 sayings, mysterious. They were more like Zen koans than theological doctrines, each one a doorway, not into history, but into consciousness. One of them reads, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. What does that even mean? It means that salvation, according to this Jesus, is not something granted from above. It is remembered from within. This Jesus is not a Savior demanding worship. He's a mirror, reflecting the divine light hidden inside you. There are no threats, no punishments, just one invitation: wake up. It is a gospel of self-realization, of spiritual autonomy, of remembering who you truly are before the world taught you to forget. Now imagine, if this version of Jesus had shaped the last 2,000 years, would Christianity look the same? Would it be built on hierarchy and fear? Would priests be needed to mediate your relationship with God? Would sin still be weaponized? Or would we be living in a world where every soul was taught, from birth, that the kingdom of heaven is not in the sky, but in the silence behind your thoughts? This is the world the Gospel of Thomas pointed to, and that is precisely why it was buried, not by accident, but by design, because a message that says you are already divine is a message that threatens every system built on control. And yet, the desert couldn't keep it hidden forever. It waited, like a seed beneath the sand, until humanity was ready to remember again. Are you feeling that stir? The ancient words are not just old. They are alive, still whispering, still inviting, still calling you home. If this gospel speaks to you, say it in the comments: I am remembering. Because what was found in Nag Hammadi was never meant to stay in the ground. It was meant to awaken something eternal. And that was just one book. In the next chapter, we uncover a gospel that tells an even more radical story. The story of a woman, a disciple, a spiritual leader whose voice was silenced, not because she lacked wisdom, but because she had too much of it. Her name was Mary. What if the most silenced gospel was not written by a man? What if the most controversial voice in early Christianity belonged to a woman? Her name was Mary. But not just any Mary. She was Mary Magdalene, the woman you've been told was a sinner, a prostitute, a side character in the shadow of holy men. But what if that was never the truth? In the Gospel of Mary, found in the same era as Thomas, buried and fragmented yet powerful, we encounter a radically different image. Here, Mary is not a fallen woman. She is a teacher, a disciple, perhaps even the one who understood Jesus best. She speaks with confidence, with clarity, with spiritual authority. In one striking scene, after Jesus has ascended, the male disciples are lost, confused about what to do next. And it is Mary who speaks. She reminds them of what Jesus truly taught. She shares visions he revealed to her in private. She tells them not to be afraid. But Peter, the very one the church would later build its foundation on, rejects her. He says, "Did he really speak to a woman and not to us?" And then Levi replies, "If the Savior made her worthy, who are you to reject her?" Let that sink in. The very foundation of the early church was already suppressing a woman's voice. Because Mary didn't just remember Jesus, she remembered truth. And that truth was threatening. In the Gospel of Mary, salvation doesn't come from suffering or blood sacrifice. It comes from freeing the soul from the illusions of the material world. The soul, she says, must rise through levels of awareness, shedding fear, letting go of false identity until it merges with the divine fullness, the pleroma. This isn't just theology, it's a spiritual map, and Mary holds the compass. But in a world ruled by empire and patriarchy, what place is there for a woman who speaks divine truth? The answer is simple: there is none. And so Mary's gospel was cut out. Her story was rewritten. She was labeled a whore, reduced to a symbol of shame instead of a vessel of wisdom. Ask yourself, why was it so important to erase her? Was it because her voice disrupted the hierarchy? Because her presence shattered the idea that only men could hold divine knowledge? Because her gospel didn't point to fear or guilt, but to direct inner awakening? What if, all along, the church feared not her sin, but her power? And now, centuries later, her words are resurfacing. You are hearing them, feeling them, perhaps remembering something your soul always knew. Mary's gospel reminds us, you are not lost, you are not broken. You are on a journey, from illusion to truth, from division to divine union. If her story speaks to you, say it now in the comments. I remember Mary. Let her voice rise again through you, because the ones they tried to silence are the ones whose words we need most. And if Mary was erased, what else was buried? In the next chapter, we step into the darkest part of this story. We follow the trail of suppression, from the Gnostics to the Cathars to the burning fields of Europe. We ask the question the church never wanted us to ask: why were they so afraid of the light? Ask yourself this: if these lost gospels offered a truth so profound, so liberating, so full of light, why were they buried? Why were they burned? Why did the most powerful religious institution on earth spend centuries making sure you never read them? To answer that, we must go back to a time when Christianity was not yet an empire. The early followers of Jesus, they were mystics, wanderers in the desert, listening not for dogma, but for truth. Their gatherings were simple: no cathedrals, no bishops in gold, only silence, prayer, and the inner flame of knowing. But everything changed in the 4th century. Christianity, once persecuted, became the state religion of the Roman Empire. Under Emperor Constantine, a decision was made: faith would now serve power, and power demands control. So the church did what all empires do. It built walls, it created ranks, it decided who could speak and who must be silenced. At the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, a new Christianity was born, one that could be governed, institutionalized, and anything that didn't fit was labeled heresy. Gnosticism, once a rich stream of mystical Christianity, was declared dangerous. Its writings were banned, its teachers were hunted, its sacred scrolls were burned in public squares. Because Gnosticism taught that divine truth comes not from obedience, but from direct experience. That God is not a king on a throne, but a light within. That salvation is not a ritual, but a remembrance. And perhaps most dangerously of all, that you don't need the church to find your way back to the divine. Imagine what that would mean for a system built on fear, guilt, and hierarchy. Imagine what would crumble if the masses realized they were never separate from God. Now fast forward to the 12th century. A group called the Cathars rises in southern France. They lived simply. They rejected the authority of Rome. They taught that the material world is a trap, and the soul must awaken to escape it. They elevated women. They refused sacraments. They believed in inner divinity over outward rituals. To the church, they were a threat beyond comprehension. And so, Rome launched a crusade, not against pagans, not against Muslims, but against fellow Christians. The Cathars were hunted. Entire towns were wiped out in what some now call a genocide of the soul. But here's the thing: even fire couldn't destroy truth. The echoes of those banned gospels survived, in symbols, in whispers, in hidden teachings passed through the ages. And now, they're reaching you sitting quietly, feeling something shift inside your chest. You who's always sensed that something in the official story never quite felt whole. If you've ever questioned why fear was used to define your relationship with God, if you've ever felt that the truth was meant to be gentle, not terrifying, you're not alone. Write it in the comments: I reject fear. I choose light. Because the church didn't bury these gospels to protect you. They buried them to protect themselves. but light always finds its way through the cracks. And now, the final chapter calls you. In the next part of this journey, we'll bring everything together. Not just a story about lost texts, but a truth about your own soul that was never meant to be forgotten. They burned the texts, but the symbols remained, and they speak to those with eyes to see. You see, truth, real, divine truth, doesn't disappear. It transforms. It hides in symbols. It slips between the cracks of history. It whispers, even when no one dares to speak aloud. When the banned Gospels were erased, their light didn't vanish. It simply moved into paintings, into stone, into rituals, cards, and architecture. Let me show you. Look at the cathedrals of Europe. Soaring Gothic arches, rose windows, ceilings that stretch like ladders to the heavens. Did you ever wonder why these buildings feel so mystical, so silent, so much more than places of worship? Because they were designed not just to house believers, but to hold encoded messages. Messages that reflect the hidden Gospels. Messages that speak of divine geometry, sacred balance, and the journey of the soul toward awakening. Now gaze upon the works of Leonardo da Vinci, a devout seeker cloaked as a scientist. His art is not mere beauty, it is theology in disguise. In The Last Supper, why is Mary Magdalene possibly seated beside Jesus, painted with equal presence and softness? Why do the figures form a perfect geometry, a symbol of sacred union, not hierarchy? Because Leonardo knew, and he painted what could not be said aloud. Or take the tarot, not fortune-telling, but a visual gospel. Each card a station in the soul's journey, from innocence to ego, to death, to divine remembrance. The high priestess veiled in mystery, the hermit holding the inner light, the tower breaking down illusions. These are not games, they are spiritual maps left behind when words were no longer safe. Even the Kabbalah, from Jewish mysticism, carries echoes of the Gnostic path, the tree of life, a ladder of ascent, 10 spheres, each one representing a layer of consciousness, a return from fragmentation to divine unity. And these weren't isolated coincidences, they were signals from those who remembered, those who could not speak openly. So they carved the truth into stained glass, wove it into carpets, etched it into sacred geometry. The divine message was never lost, it was encrypted, waiting for a generation who could decode it again, and that generation is us. If this awakens something in you, say it now in the comments. I see the signs, because symbols don't lie, they survive. They point to something ancient, something forgotten, something sacred that lives still in you. What they tried to silence still sings, and the voice of truth, however faint, is beginning to rise again. So now, you've heard the Gospels they tried to bury. You've walked through silence and sand, through broken scrolls and sacred symbols, and perhaps you feel something inside you stirring, not a belief, but a memory. Because this was never just about history. It was never just about lost texts. It's about you. You who always felt that something was missing. You who sensed that the divine was closer than they told you. You who carries a spark the world tried to snuff out. The banned Gospels were not destroyed. They became a mirror, reflecting the forgotten truth that the kingdom of heaven was never in a book, never locked behind a temple wall. It was inside you, all along, and now you are remembering. This isn't just a video, it's a reminder. You don't need permission to awaken. You don't need a priest to meet the sacred. You don't need to fear damnation when you've already carried divinity in your breath since the beginning. So what comes next? That's up to you. But if this message moved you, if your soul whispered yes somewhere deep and quiet, then this is your time. This is your call. Subscribe to Mystica Nexus, not just to follow, but to walk beside. Leave your reflection in the comments. Share this light. Let others feel what you felt. Let the veil lift, one soul at a time, because truth can be buried but not killed. And when we remember together, we become more than seekers. We become a movement. We become the gospel come alive again.